When someone breaks your heart, they expect you to fall apart, to chase, to need answers. But there's something far more unsettling to the ego than your tears, and that's your self-respect. Today, we're talking about the quiet shift that doesn't just heal you, it vibrates him. When someone breaks your heart, there's an unspoken assumption attached to it. Not always consciously, not always cruelly, but it's there. They expect pain, confusion, emotional fallout. They expect questions, late-night messages, explanations demanded, or at the very least visible evidence that they mattered deeply. This expectation feeds the ego. It reassures them that even though the relationship ended, their importance didn't. And this is why your dignity becomes so powerful in moments of heartbreak. Dignity doesn't mean pretending you're not hurting. It doesn't mean being cold, dismissive, or emotionally shut down. It means refusing to let your pain turn into behavior that diminishes your self-respect. It's the choice not to chase someone who has already shown you they're willing to lose you. It's the decision not to negotiate your worth with someone who decided they didn't want to meet it. That quiet restraint speaks far louder than emotional outbursts ever could. When you respond to heartbreak with dignity, something unexpected happens. The dynamic shifts. Instead of them feeling in control of the narrative, the timing, the emotional aftermath, you reclaim control of yourself. You're no longer auditioning for reassurance or trying to be understood by someone who opted out of understanding you. And ego struggles with that because ego thrives on reaction. It feeds on proof that it had an impact. Think about how unsettling it is when someone doesn't behave the way you anticipated, when someone remains composed where you expected chaos, calm where you expected desperation, strength where you expected weakness. It forces a pause. It creates space for reflection. Suddenly, the story they told themselves about the breakup doesn't feel as clean. If you're okay, or at least holding yourself together, it challenges the idea that they were the prize and you were the one left behind. This is why dignity isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't post cryptic messages or dramatic goodbyes. It doesn't try to prove anything. It simply continues. You go to work. You take care of your body. You show up for your life, you don't punish them, and you don't punish yourself. And in doing so, you send a message without ever intending to. Your sense of self was never dependent on them. Ego hates that, not because it wants you to suffer, but because it wants to feel significant. When you crumble, it confirms importance. When you chase, it confirms value. But when you hold your dignity, it removes that confirmation entirely. You're no longer a mirror reflecting their impact back to them. You become your own anchor. There's also a deeper gift in this for you. Dignity protects your healing. Every time you resist the urge to reach out for validation from the person who hurt you, you strengthen your trust in yourself. You teach yourself that you can survive disappointment without losing your identity, that you can feel deeply without acting desperately, and that self-trust is what allows you to move forward without bitterness. The irony is that dignity often gets misunderstood as indifference. But it's not that you didn't care. It's that you cared enough about yourself not to abandon your standards in a moment of pain. And that distinction matters. Because long after the ego bruises fade, yours or theirs, what remains is how you treated yourself when you were vulnerable. And dignity ensures that when you look back on this chapter, you don't feel embarrassed by who you became trying to hold on to someone who was already gone. After a heartbreak, one of the most natural impulses we have is to look back toward the person who caused the pain and ask them to soothe it. We want explanations, clarity, or even just acknowledgement that what we shared mattered. It feels logical, after all. They were the source of the connection, so it makes sense to believe they might also be the source of relief. But this is where so many people unknowingly give away their power. Seeking validation from the person who hurt you keeps you emotionally tethered to them. Even if the relationship is over, the dependency remains. You're still orienting your sense of worth around their response. Whether they reply, how quickly they do, what tone they use, whether they regret anything. In that dynamic, you're not healing, you're waiting. And waiting places them in a position of authority over your emotional state. The moment you stop doing this, something profound shifts. When you no longer need them to explain themselves, apologize, or affirm your value, you step out of the role of the one seeking approval. You reclaim your internal compass. Instead of asking, "Why wasn't I enough?" you begin asking, "Why did I tolerate less than I deserved?" That single shift redirects your energy from self-doubt to self-respect. Ego struggles deeply with this change. When someone knows you're waiting on their words to feel better, it reinforces a sense of importance. Even guilt can feed ego if it proves they had a powerful effect on you. But when you no longer look to them for emotional resolution, their influence quietly dissolves. They lose the role of judge, comforter, or central figure in your emotional world. They become simply someone who made a choice, and that choice no longer defines you. This doesn't require confrontation or dramatic declarations. You don't need to announce that you've stopped seeking validation. It happens internally. You stop checking your phone for their name. You stop replaying conversations, imagining what you wish you had said. You stop crafting messages in your head that you never send. And in that stillness, you start hearing your own voice again. What often surprises people is how destabilizing this can be for the other person. When you don't need their reassurance, it forces them to sit with their own decisions without the buffer of your emotional availability. They can no longer rely on your pain as proof that they mattered. And that absence of validation can feel far more uncomfortable than anger or confrontation ever would. But the most important impact is what happens inside you. When you stop seeking validation from the person who hurt you, you begin rebuilding your sense of worth from a place that can't be taken away. You learn that your value isn't something granted by another person's attention or remorse. It exists independently of how the relationship ended. This is where true healing begins. Not when they finally understand you, but when you understand yourself. Not when they give you closure, but when you realize you don't need it from them. Closure becomes an internal process rather than an external negotiation. And with that comes a quiet confidence, the kind that doesn't need to be proven, explained, or validated. In choosing not to seek validation from the person who broke your heart, you're not hardening yourself or shutting down emotionally. You're simply choosing to place your emotional safety in your own hands. And that choice changes everything. After heartbreak, there's a powerful fork in the road that most people don't realize they're standing at. One path is reaction, the other is growth. Reaction is instinctive, it's fueled by shock, hurt, and the need to regain control. Growth, on the other hand, is intentional. It's quieter, slower, and far less dramatic, but infinitely more transformative. Choosing growth over reaction is one of the most self-respecting decisions you can make. And it's also the one that unsettles the ego the most. Reaction looks like needing to be seen in your pain. It's the impulse to explain yourself, to justify your feelings, to make sure they understand what they did to you. It's responding too quickly, saying too much, or doing things you later wish you hadn't, all in the name of being heard. Reaction is understandable, but it keeps you emotionally entangled. You're still orbiting around the person who hurt you, even if the connection is painful. Growth doesn't deny the pain, it simply refuses to let pain run the show. Growth is what happens when you pause instead of react. When you feel the urge to reach out, but you don't. When you want to prove your worth, but instead you choose to invest in it. Growth says, I will process this, but I will not let it turn me into someone I don't recognize. This choice is deeply confronting for the ego. Ego expects reaction because reaction confirms impact. It says, I mattered enough to disrupt you. Growth removes that feedback loop. When you channel your energy into your life rather than into them, it creates a kind of emotional invisibility. You're no longer performing your pain for them to witness. You're doing the work privately, and that absence is jarring. Choosing growth often looks very ordinary from the outside. You focus on your routines, you take care of your body when it would be easier not to. You surround yourself with people who remind you of who you are. You reflect honestly, not just on what they did, but on what you want to do differently next time. And in that process, something shifts. You're no longer asking, how do I get over this? You're asking, how do I become stronger because of this? There's also a quiet confidence that comes from knowing you didn't let heartbreak shrink you. You didn't abandon your values for relief. You didn't sacrifice your long-term self-respect for short-term comfort. That confidence isn't loud or performative. It shows up in the way you carry yourself, the way you speak, the standards you quietly uphold, and it's unmistakable. Ego struggles with growth because growth is self-contained. It doesn't require permission, validation, or acknowledgement. When you grow, you remove the other person from the center of the story. They're no longer the main character in your healing narrative. They're a chapter, significant, yes, but not defining. And for someone who expected to linger as a point of emotional reference, that can be deeply unsettling. Perhaps the most strong part of choosing growth over reaction is that it future-proofs you. You're not just healing from this heartbreak, you're becoming someone who will navigate the next connection with more clarity and self-trust. You learn that you can feel deeply without losing yourself, that you can grieve without unraveling. And that realization becomes a kind of inner stability that no one can take from you. Growth doesn't seek to teach anyone else a lesson. It teaches you one instead. That your best response to heartbreak is not to prove your value, but to embody it. Silence after a breakup is often misunderstood. People assume it's passive, avoidant, or emotionally immature. But when silence is chosen consciously, not as a tactic, not as a punishment, but as an act of self-respect, it becomes one of the most powerful responses available. Because silence doesn't argue, it doesn't defend, it doesn't chase understanding from someone who has already chosen not to stay. When a relationship ends, there's usually an urge to explain yourself one last time, to make sure they fully grasp what they did, how they hurt you, what they're losing. It feels like closure will come from saying the right words. But more often than not, those words don't land the way we hope. They get minimized, rationalized, or forgotten. And instead of feeling lighter, you feel exposed, like you handed your vulnerability to someone who didn't protect it. Silence interrupts that cycle. When you don't rush to explain, justify, or emotionally unpack everything for them, you remove yourself from the role of emotional narrator. You stop trying to manage how you're perceived. And that's where the real power lies. Because silence doesn't give them material to argue with or dismiss. It leaves space. And space invites reflection. Ego is deeply uncomfortable with unanswered questions. When someone doesn't get the emotional reaction they anticipated, no long messages, no breakdowns, no attempts to reconnect, it forces them inward. They're left alone with their assumptions and expectations. They expected explanation. They expected engagement. Instead, they're met with absence, and absence has weight. This kind of silence isn't coldness, it's containment. It's you deciding that not every feeling needs to be shared with the person who caused it. It's recognizing that your emotions deserve a safer place to land. Silence protects your dignity because it keeps you from oversharing in moments of emotional vulnerability. It gives you time to process before you speak. if you ever choose to speak at all. There's also something quietly clarifying about silence. When you stop communicating, you begin to see the relationship more clearly. You're no longer influenced by their responses, tone, or mixed signals. Without new input, old patterns become obvious. You recognize where you compromised, where you overgave, where you ignored your intuition. Silence becomes a mirror, not for them, but for you. Paradoxically, that same silence often speaks volumes to the other person. It communicates boundaries without confrontation. It says, I respect myself enough not to chase closure from someone who walked away. That message doesn't need to be delivered verbally. It's felt. And because it's felt rather than heard, it bypasses defensiveness. What makes silence so unsettling to the ego is that it removes control. When you engage emotionally, the other person still has influence. They can reassure you, confuse you, or pull you back into familiar dynamics. Silence shuts that door. It's not dramatic. It's final in a quiet way. And that quiet finality forces a reckoning. But the deepest impact of silence is inner. It teaches you restraint. It strengthens your emotional muscles. Each time you choose not to react impulsively, you reinforce the belief that you can sit with discomfort without escaping it. That ability to tolerate uncertainty without self-betrayal is one of the strongest forms of emotional maturity. Silence doesn't mean you have nothing to say. It means you value yourself enough to choose when, how, and with whom you say it. And in that choice, you regain something heartbreak often steals: your sense of composure, your clarity, and your power. When someone breaks your heart, it's natural to want them to feel the weight of what they've done. We imagine that if they could just experience a fraction of the pain, or if they saw us struggling, they would finally understand. But the truth is, trying to make someone regret their choices rarely produces the satisfaction we expect. Instead, the most powerful response isn't about forcing regret. It's about becoming unavailable. It's about reclaiming your presence in the world on your own terms and refusing to let them occupy the center of your emotional universe. Choosing unavailability doesn't mean shutting down completely or pretending the relationship didn't matter. It's not about emotional manipulation or silent punishment. It's a conscious decision to redirect your energy toward yourself rather than towards someone who has already chosen a path that doesn't include you. By stepping back, you create a natural space in which your absence communicates more than words ever could. Availability is a currency in relationships. And when you withhold it, not out of spite but out of self-respect, it forces a different type of reflection. Ego cannot endure being irrelevant. When you become unavailable, the focus shifts from them controlling your reactions to you controlling your own. You're no longer reacting to messages, calls, or attempts at connection. You don't explain yourself, you don't justify your feelings, and you don't provide the validation that ego craves. That alone unsettles someone who may have assumed you would always be there, waiting or willing to re-engage. They expected you to be accessible emotionally, but your unavailability removes that safety net. The beauty of this approach is that it doesn't require confrontation. There's no need for lectures, guilt trips, or public displays of your value. Your absence speaks for itself. Life continues, and they are not part of the narrative in the same way anymore. You show through action, not words, that your worth isn't tied to their recognition or regret. And when they notice that you've created distance, not in anger but in choice, it has a subtle yet profound impact on the ego. Ego depends on attention, and removing that attention is a powerful form of silent assertion. Unavailability also gives you the freedom to focus on growth and healing. Instead of ruminating over what they think, You invest in what matters to you, your routines, your goals, your friendships, and your sense of self. Every moment you spend reclaiming your life is a moment of empowerment. It reinforces that your happiness and your sense of worth are independent of their actions. This independence is a cornerstone of emotional resilience, and it's what shifts the dynamic from dependency to autonomy. Interestingly, becoming unavailable does more than protect you. It subtly shifts the way the other person perceives the situation. When someone realizes that you are no longer available on their terms, it forces reflection. They can no longer take your attention for granted or assume they have a role in your emotional responses. Your absence becomes a mirror, reflecting back the choices they made without needing to say a word. This is far more effective than trying to make them regret their behavior, because it's not about punishment. It's about demonstrating self-respect in action. The final piece of power in this approach is the sense of control it gives you. Heartbreak can feel like a loss of agency, like life is happening to you rather than through you. By choosing unavailability, you reclaim agency. You decide how to interact, when to respond, and what role they play in your life going forward. That agency is empowering, and it changes the internal narrative from self-pity to mastery. Unavailability is a statement without a single word. It shows that you are not defined by someone else's decisions, that your emotional state is not their responsibility, and that your self-worth is intact regardless of whether they feel regret. It's a quiet but undeniable way to take your power back, heal on your terms, and demonstrate that when someone loses you, it is their loss, not yours. Moving on after heartbreak is often painted as a dramatic process: big gestures, confrontations, long explanations, or public displays of feelings. But the kind of power that truly dismantles ego is quiet, subtle, and completely self-contained. It's the moment when you move on without needing the other person to see it, acknowledge it, or even notice it. That's when the shift occurs. The moment your life continues fully and vibrantly, and their absence doesn't leave a void that controls your happiness. Moving on without needing them to notice starts with internalizing your value. You recognize that your worth is inherent, not dependent on their attention or acknowledgement. You no longer wait for signs that you are appreciated or that they regret their actions. You stop looking for external validation to confirm what you already know, that you deserve love, respect, and joy. Once this belief becomes central, your actions naturally reflect it. You live fully, not performatively. And that authenticity is invisible to manipulation and ego-driven dynamics. There's a profound freedom in this approach because it removes the other person from your emotional equation. Heartbreak often feels like a tether. Every thought, feeling, and decision can get weighed down by the person who hurt you. You wonder if they're thinking about you, if they miss you, or if they realize what they've lost. But when you move on without needing them to notice, those questions no longer dictate your daily life. You redirect energy that used to flow toward uncertainty into areas that nurture growth, creativity, and fulfillment. This freedom is unsettling to ego because ego thrives on significance. Ego wants to see the proof that it mattered, that it left a mark. When it doesn't, it experiences a kind of invisible frustration. The quieter, calmer, and more confident your life becomes without their recognition, the more destabilizing it is. Ego struggles with absence that cannot be coerced into attention. Unlike dramatic gestures that can be manipulated or criticized, quiet self-empowerment is untouchable and immune to external validation. Moving on also transforms the way you relate to yourself. You begin to see that your emotional experience is yours alone, and that happiness isn't contingent on someone else's choices. Each step forward, whether it's investing in a hobby, strengthening friendships, focusing on career goals, or simply enjoying life, is a tangible act of reclaiming your personal narrative. You start defining your life by what fulfills you rather than what would elicit a response from them. In essence, you build a life that doesn't revolve around their perception, presence, or acknowledgement. There's also a subtle lesson here in restraint. Many people assume that to teach someone a lesson after heartbreak, they must make themselves visible or provoke attention. But the opposite is far more potent. When you move forward silently and gracefully, you create an undeniable shift in the power dynamic. You demonstrate that emotional control, self-respect, and personal growth cannot be dictated or diminished by anyone else. They may notice, or they may not, but that is irrelevant. The point is that you are no longer holding yourself hostage to their ego. This approach requires patience and self-trust. It's not about instant transformation. It's about consistent alignment with your values and your sense of self. Each day you choose your own fulfillment over seeking acknowledgement from someone who hurt you. You reinforce the internal belief that you are whole without them. That cumulative consistency eventually reshapes your identity from someone defined by heartbreak to someone defined by resilience, strength, and autonomy. Ultimately, moving on without needing them to notice is the ultimate quiet power. It doesn't rely on drama, confrontation, or proof. It relies on you living fully, honoring your own worth, and refusing to allow their absence or their presence to dictate your emotional state. When you do this, you embody a truth that ego cannot tolerate. Your life, your happiness, and your peace exist independently, and no one else has control over them. Heartbreak doesn't have to define you. The real power isn't in making him regret it. It's in showing up for yourself, in peace, in confidence. When you stop chasing, stop proving, and start living fully, his ego can't touch you, and your life becomes unstoppable.